today in a spirit of non-partisanship, to put our differences aside and take a good idea and a good perspective, no matter where it comes from. You know, too often in this place, we refuse to accept ideas or input from other people. And so I thought I would remedy that by taking the words and the message of the leader of the NDP, putting them in a conservative motion so that all of us could vote for the very wise things that he said. So allow me, in the spirit of this nonpartisan spirit, to read off the motion that we have here. Common sense conservative motion, whereas the leader of the NDP said he has ripped up his supply and confidence agreement with the Liberal government, whereas the NDP leader said the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people, whereas the NDP leader said the Liberal government will always cave to corporate greed and always step in to make sure the unions have no power. And he said that in response to the Liberal Labour Minister's referral to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board that ordered the workers of Teamsters Canada Rail Conference and the ILWU 514 to resume their duties, violating their right to strike. Therefore, the House agrees with the NDP leader, and the House proclaims that it has lost confidence in the Prime Minister and the government.
Let's get into it. Another non-confidence vote planned in an attempt to force election and oust Trudeau. This was posted December 3rd. We have a bunch of these articles coming out again. Tories will try toppling Trudeau after 2 failed non-confidence attempts. Yeah, 2. We're heading on to a 3rd now. The Conservative Party will attempt to topple Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government once again with their 3rd non-confidence motion of the fall. The motion, which is expected to be tabled before the House of Commons on Thursday, aka today, is using past snippets of criticisms of Trudeau's Liberals coming from the NDP. I don't buy it for a second that this is going to happen. I don't believe that it's going to pass. The Bloc, time and time again, claims that they want the Liberal government gone as they are not getting what they want. The NDP has made it quite obvious that their coalition has not ended with Trudeau, and even though they call him out almost every question period, they still support him behind the scenes no matter what. Right here even, whereas the NDP leader said, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. The motion states in preamble and continues to ask that. Therefore, the House agrees with the NDP leader. Jagmeet and the NDP say this all the time. The Liberals are too weak. They're too selfish. They don't care. They're not for Canadians. They're not here to provide. Their policies are not for Canadians, whatever. The 2 past non-confidence votes they voted against, and they still back Justin Trudeau in every way, shape, and form. I do not believe it is going to happen. And if it does happen today, I highly doubt Trudeau will actually get the boot. Speaker's ruling clears path for Trudeau's government to face successive tests of confidence in days ahead. NDP won't support Conservative non-confidence motion.
Questions? Questions orales.
Question period.
Calgary Forest Lawn.
They say weak men create hard times, and this weak Prime Minister's inflationary deficits gave Canadians the worst standard of living in over 40 years. The finance minister promised one of her fiscal guardrails would not be going over her deficit, which is $40 billion. In fact, the PBO said she blew right past it. Simple question, what's the deficit?
The deficit is so large, they're afraid to say it.
Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague.
Colleagues, please.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what my honourable colleague fails to point out is that Canada is projected to have the fastest growing economy in the G7 next year. He fails to point out that we are creating jobs at a near record pace. He doesn't understand that wages are increasing faster than inflation. His strategy for the economy is to make cuts to the programs that are supporting people, cuts to the programs that are building houses. He's opposing, ironically, the tax cut that would deliver relief to families over the holidays. We're going to focus on growing the economy in a way that works for everyone, not the Conservative approach to cut the supports that families need.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
He could have just said he doesn't know, like he doesn't know where the million people he lost went. And even this number-challenged Prime Minister admits every new dollar of his handouts make his inflationary deficits worse. He says he's going to leave the economy to the bankers, that he doesn't think about monetary policy, and he said budgets balance themselves. It's the same incompetence that made Canadians bank broke, building broke, and belly broke. Canadians want to know how broken the Liberal deficit is. What's the number?
Way to go, Jack!
The honourable minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
My honourable colleague seems to have a penchant for alliteration and personal insults, but what he lacks is an ability to advance policies that will grow the economy or actually
Personal insults, boo-hoo.
at every opportunity. They oppose the investments that are creating jobs in this country. They oppose the investments that are building homes in this country. And they oppose the measures that are going to provide tax cuts to middle-class families, to low-income families, to workers in this country. For once, I wish we could have a debate about the issues instead of stooping to these lows where they throw insults instead of advancing policies that help real people.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Here's a common sense policy that common sense Conservatives will bring in when his constituents fire him after the next election.
Yeah.
We're going to axe the tax for good for everyone. And these deficits that this Prime Minister keeps making sent over 2 million Canadians into a food bank in a single month, made 1 in 4 Canadians skip meals, and sent 1 in 5 kids into poverty. But the Finance Minister said all of them are just feeling a vibe session. Look, if she's not going to release her economic statement, will she at least tell Canadians how bad she's going to blow through her deficit?
Yeah, way to go, Jack!
The honourable minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
I'd like to remind that member that the last time the Conservatives were in government, more than 16% of kids were living in poverty, over 1 million children. Since we've come into government, Mr. Speaker, we've lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty through measures like the Canada Child Benefit, supporting families each and every month with up to over $700, through the National School Food Program, now in place in 4 provinces across this country, helping to ensure kids have food at school. Not to mention an HST, GST tax break, Mr. Speaker. We're there for Canadians.
Yeah, that NDP MP still wears a mask.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister supported by the Bloc Québécois, this Liberal government is so bad that it's ashamed of its own results. In the last budget, the Minister of Finance predicted a $40 billion deficit, but now we know that the government has added at least $6 billion in inflationary spending to that forecast. But the Prime Minister is ashamed to reveal what the state of the public coffers is. When will the Prime Minister accept our offer to be transparent with Canadians and present the fall economic statement on Monday? Why are they so afraid of letting Canadians know the truth? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Well, speaking of telling Canadians the truth, Mr. Speaker, when we offered a tax break to Canadians over the holidays, a proposal that a leader of the Conservative Party supported a mere 2 years ago, then what did the leader of the official opposition do? He told his MPs to vote against it, regardless of what they actually wanted. Here in Ottawa today, Conservative members are no longer the representatives of their constituents here in Ottawa. On the contrary, they carry the will of their leader back into their ridings. It's inexcusable. If they really are serious about helping Canadians, they will vote for the tax break.
Sit down, Stephen Gaybo.
I would invite the Honourable Member for Port-Neuf, Jacques Cartier, to not take the floor, if not allowed by this chair. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, this member ought to be ashamed. The Prime Minister, with the support of the Bloc, keeps spending unaccountably, or without accountability, rather. Meanwhile, families are paying a price for this. According to a Sylvain Charlebois report on food prices, families will have to pay up to $800 more for the groceries in 2025. The Prime Minister thinks that budgets will balance themselves, but he has also said that deficits lead to inflation. He promised to limit the deficit to $40 billion. So will next week's economic statement confirm that he will keep that commitment, or will he cause even more inflation for families? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, my colleague just quoted Sylvain Charlebois on food prices. That same person has said that climate change is the biggest challenge for the agri-food sector. In fact, he just published a report on the impact, the macroeconomic impacts of all this on the agricultural sector. And on page 14, the first part of the report is on climate change. Does it mention the carbon price? No, not at all. That's not even a factor, according to Professor.
Canada doesn't need AOC. They have a whole party of AOCs sitting over here.
Documents like this as props. You can quote things, but you can't visibly reference a document. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Well, Mr. Speaker, this will come as a shock to no one, but the Senate is still dragging its feet on Bill C-282 for protecting supply management. For 18 months, our so-called wise men and women in the upper chamber have been looking at this bill, which has a single clause. They've spent 18 months studying a single clause. And yet today they are still postponing a vote on a crucial amendment. They're trying to push it until after the holidays. Will all of the party leaders ask the senators to stop dragging their feet, to have a vote, and to ensure that C-282 is carried before Christmas? The Honourable Government House Leader.
It's the crocodile
As my
lady.
colleague knows very well, we on this side of the House, we support this bill. The Prime Minister, all of our ministers and caucus have spoken with the senators.
Karina the
suggesting
crocodile.
that they do that work. In fact, the only party leader in this House that we don't know where he stands is the Conservative leader, because we know his caucus is divided on the issue of supply management. But I can assure my honourable colleague that this government fully supports supply management. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Things are not moving quickly enough.
Well, even when she's not speaking in French, you can barely hear her, so...
And not managed to study a bill with a single clause. It can only mean one of two things. Either they're ready to retire or they're thumbing their nose at us once again. And when I say that, I'm not just speaking of the MPs here in this House, I'm also speaking of all the farmers in Quebec and Canada who are under the supply managed system. That's 90,000 jobs just in Quebec. These people deserve to get an answer before Christmas. On behalf of our farmers, will all the parties ask the senators to get moving before the holidays? The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my honourable colleague in the Bloc Québécois, we agree. This is important for farmers. This is important for the supply managed sectors in Quebec and elsewhere in the country. We agree with that bill. We support what the Bloc has done. We support the bill getting through the Senate. Only the Conservatives seem to have issues with this. So I would invite my honourable member for the Bloc Québécois to speak with the Conservative Party to ensure that Conservative senators stop blocking this bill.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. L'honorable député de New Westminster, Burnaby.
Les gens en arrachent avec...
Mr. Speaker, people are struggling with the cost of living throughout the country, and a new report shows that a four-person family will pay $800 additional for groceries in 2025. Meanwhile, big grocery chain CEOs are raking in the profits, but the Conservatives don't care at all about the working class. They always want to help their billionaire buddies. Meanwhile, the Liberals could change things if they wanted to. Will they finally stand up against the greed of the big grocery chains? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank...
Well, Randy supposedly stepped down. Randy, after his big scandal, was quote-unquote told by Trudeau to step down and deal with his issues. The funniest part about all of that with the Randy issue is that Randy still votes and is still able to participate in the House of Commons, even though he has stepped down and is supposed to not be involved in anything HOC-wise.
in food in 2025. While grocery CEOs are getting richer, workers
Yes, which Randy are we talking about? That's a very good point indeed.
down. And the Conservatives, they want tax breaks for CEOs, leaving Canadians paying more for everything. Billionaires don't need relief. The working class does. Will the Liberals permanently remove the GST off of life essentials so that families can get a break?
Here, here.
Yeah, exactly. Randy is still a major part of the Liberal government, even though he, quote-unquote, was supposed to step down.
A break to Canadians. We know that the cost of food has gone too high.
The corruption continues.
Tax over the holidays. The irony is the Conservatives make the same attack, but they are opposing a tax cut on food for families. Right. Mr. Speaker, I should plan as well the idea that we've got an important stakeholder in Ottawa advocating for a national school food program this week. Her name is Molly. She is an 8-year-old in grade 3 at A.G. Bailey in Nova Scotia, and we're going to provide not only a tax cut on food, but a national school food program so she and her classmates will be able to enjoy a healthy meal every day of the year.
Order. The honourable member for Foothills.
The NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition is delivering Canadians a Christmas nightmare. Canada's Food Price Index report showed that, on average, Canadians will spend $800 more on groceries this year. The Prime Minister's carbon tax is making a dire situation even worse. The number of food bank visits in Toronto are up 1 million people to 3.5 million visits, a 43% increase in new food bank users. Scurvy is on the rise. Food insecurity has surged more than 20%. All Canadians want for Christmas is a carbon tax election. When will this Prime Minister make that Christmas wish come true?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker. The very report that the member opposite...
Order. Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary from the top, please.
Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker. The very report that the members opposite cite says that climate change is the greatest driver of food price inflation. It's the same thing Sylvain Charlebois said when he came to committee recently, and the Conservatives have no plan to fight climate change. In addition, we stepped up over the holidays to offer Canadians a GST tax cut. What did the Conservatives do? They opposed. When we step up to help children across Canada get food at school, what do the Conservatives do? They oppose. You want to make Canadians Canadians a Merry Christmas? Step up.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Well, I guess it would take a Festivus miracle to have a serious Prime Minister who understands that when you increase taxes on farmers who grows the food, truckers who move the food, you increase costs of the food. But after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, this is the Christmas list Canadians face. Grocery prices up $800. Price of food inflation is up 36% higher in Canada than the United States. A quarter of Canadians are skipping meals. When will this Prime Minister grant a common sense Christmas gift to Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
I would like to quote Marc Lévesque, Chief of Security at TD Bank, and he says, I quote, "Okay, enough. This is an outright lie, and I'm not in the habit of calling people liars. The report he's referring to does not mention that the carbon tax is a factor behind the $800 increase, and certainly does not say that carbon tax will cost families $800 more on food." That's coming from the Chief Security Officer at TD Bank, Mr. Speaker.
Money launderer, thanks.
Order. The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Under this Prime Minister, New Brunswickers continue to struggle and will now have to pay $800 more for food next year. After 9 years, the NDP Liberal carbon tax has caused the price of groceries to skyrocket. According to Food Bank Canada, the number of people accessing food banks increased by 73% the last 2 years. Over 1 million Ontarians are relying on food banks. That's more people that live in my home province. Canadians deserve better. Will the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to call a carbon tax election?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A reminder that that member and all of the Conservatives have had an opportunity to support the work that we're doing to provide relief to families in New Brunswick and across the country. I look to the National School Food Program, Mr. Speaker. So far, 4 provinces have signed on, meaning over 184,000 kids will receive food at school this school year. More than 1.5 million meals, Mr. Speaker. They could support us with affordability measures should they choose to do what's right, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for She Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, not a single plate of food has been served, and 1.4 million Canadian children are living in poverty. The rise in the cost of food is a direct result of the carbon tax. The Prime Minister doesn't understand. If you tax the farmer that grows the food and the trucker that ships it, you end up taxing the family that buys it. Already, the NDP Liberal carbon tax has resulted in food prices increasing 36% faster in Canada than across the border. Will the Prime Minister finally give Canadians the carbon tax election now?